The rain came down hard that morning over Fort Rainier. The sky hung low and gray, the kind that made even the steel barracks look tired. New recruits hurried through the puddles, clutching their duffel bags and shouting to be heard over the wind. It was the start of another training cycle, another chance for the Army to test who would break and who would endure. Among the crowd was Sergeant Leah Carter. Quiet and steady, her dark hair tied neatly beneath her cap. She looked too young to wear the rank on her shoulder. At least that's what most people thought. Her uniform was crisp, her boots spotless, but her eyes, calm, watchful, told a story no one could guess. As the new company commander, Captain Marcus Delaney stepped out of his jeep. His eyes scanned the lineup. He was in his mid-30s, tall, confident, with that unmistakable look of a man who thought he had everything under control. He carried a clipboard and an air of impatience. "All right, listen up," he barked, pacing before the line of soldiers. "I don't care what you've done before. Whatever medals you think matter, forget them. You start fresh here." Leah stood at attention, unbothered. She'd heard those words before. Delaney's eyes landed on her and lingered a moment too long. "You," he said, pointing. "Sergeant Carter, right? How old are you?" 34, sir," Leah replied firmly. Delaney raised a brow. 34? You look barely 24. Did they misprint your file? A few soldiers smirked. Someone in the back whispered, "Guess she got promoted for good looks." Delaney didn't correct them. He simply shook his head, making a note on his clipboard. "We'll see if that experience of yours matches the paperwork." Leah kept her gaze forward. But something flickered in her eyes, something old and tired. Over the next week, Delaney made it clear he didn't trust her. He questioned every order she gave. He reassigned her from operations to logistics. "Less pressure," he said. He ignored her recommendations during briefings. The younger troops followed his lead, whispering behind her back, calling her the kid sergeant. When one of them joked that she probably got her stripes from office work, Leah didn't respond. She just walked away, her silence sharper than any insult. But that night, when the barracks were quiet, she sat alone outside under the floodlight. The cold wind tugged at her sleeves, revealing the faint white lines of scars across her forearm. She ran her fingers over them absently, marks from shrapnel, from years she never spoke about. Inside her duffel bag, under her folded uniforms, was an old photograph, a group of soldiers in desert gear, squinting under a blazing sun. She was in the middle, dust on her face, rifle across her chest, eyes half shut from exhaustion. Most of those faces were gone now. She tucked the photo away and whispered to the night, "You don't have to prove it again." But she knew she would. 2 weeks later, during a field exercise, Delaney's doubts grew louder. They were running a live simulation, troops moving through dense forest, mock enemy fire, communication drills. Leah was assigned as squad lead. From the command post, Delaney watched through binoculars. He saw her stop her unit, suddenly crouch low and order them to circle left. "What's she doing?" he muttered. "She's off the route," his second-in-command shrugged. "Maybe she saw something, sir," Delaney scoffed. "Or maybe she's lost." Minutes later, the sound of simulated gunfire cracked through the trees. Leah's squad had ambushed the opposing team. Perfect timing, perfect placement. They completed the mission in half the expected time. When they returned, Delaney clapped once, slow. "Impressive luck," he said dryly. "But next time, follow the planned path." Leah met his gaze, quiet but firm. "With respect, sir, the planned path would have run straight into the enemy line." Delaney's jaw tightened. "Are you implying I don't know how to read a map, Sergeant?" "No, sir," she said evenly. "Just that sometimes the ground doesn't match the plan." The room went still. That night he reviewed her file again. It was spotless but oddly thin. No deployment history before Fort Rainier. No listed commendations, no injury reports. Just 5 years of classified assignments. He frowned. Who is she, really? The next morning, Delaney arrived early at the training yard. Leah was already there, running drills alone before sunrise, her breath visible in the cold. He watched for a moment before calling out, "You trying to prove something, Sergeant?" She stopped, hands on her knees. "Just staying ready, sir." He walked closer. "You're not like the others," he said. "Most of them need to be pushed. You look like you've already been through something." Leah didn't look up. "Sir, everyone's been through something." Delaney crossed his arms. "You've got scars on your arms. I noticed during inspection." Training accident? For a moment the air felt heavier. Leah looked at him, her eyes steady. Something like that. He nodded slowly, unsure how to read her. You don't have to be mysterious, Carter. You're part of my team now. She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then trust me, sir. Delaney hesitated. Trust didn't come easy to him, especially not with someone who looked barely out of college, claiming experience she couldn't prove. Still, there was something about her composure, calm under pressure, precise, never boastful. It unsettled him. That evening during chow, a rumor spread through the barracks. Someone had seen Leah's name on an old classified roster, a list of veterans from an operation overseas. Most of the names were redacted, but hers wasn't. She was in Kandahar, one soldier whispered. Bull, she's too young. Look it up, man. Operation Scorpion Nest, that's like elite unit stuff. The laughter faded. Nobody knew what to believe. Leah said nothing. She just ate quietly and left before anyone could ask. But when Delaney saw her that night walking across the parade ground, the floodlights cutting long shadows behind her, he felt the first crack of doubt, not about her, but about himself. He'd spent weeks trying to prove she didn't belong. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure who really did. And somewhere deep down, a question took root. What kind of scars does a soldier carry to make her look so young and so old at the same time? The following week began like any other. Cold mornings, long drills, and the constant rumble of trucks echoing across Fort Rainer. But beneath the surface, things had shifted. The soldiers still traded jokes, but now their laughter was uneasy. The rumor about Sergeant Leah Carter had spread too far to ignore. Captain Marcus Delaney noticed it immediately. Men who once snickered at her now avoided her gaze. The word Kandahar carried weight, even for those who'd never set foot outside the States. Delaney tried to dismiss it. Probably some clerical mix-up, he told himself. But every time he saw her, quiet, focused, unshaken, something inside him stirred. One afternoon, during a tactical briefing, Delaney caught himself watching her again. Leah stood in the back, arms folded, listening as he outlined a new training scenario. The map on the wall showed an urban mock-up, streets, alleys, two-story buildings. He noticed the faint scar peeking above her collar, a thin, pale line near her neck. It looked like an old burn. He looked away quickly, clearing his throat. "Sergeant Carter," he said suddenly, "you've been quiet. Any thoughts on this layout?" She glanced at the map once, then spoke without hesitation. "Sir, that north alley's a trap, too narrow for a fallback route. If we take fire from that corner building, we'd have no cover." Delaney frowned. "You got all that from one look?" Leah nodded. "Seen it before. Different place. Same mistake." The room went still. Delaney met her eyes, but she didn't blink. She wasn't bragging. She was remembering. He cleared his throat again, forcing composure. "Duly noted, Sergeant." After the meeting, when everyone filed out, he lingered by the map. "Seen it before," he repeated quietly to himself. Then he opened her personnel file once more, still redacted, still blank. Only one line stood out under prior assignments. Operation Scorpion Nest, restricted access. He leaned back in his chair, frowning. "That's not just classified," he muttered. "That's buried." That evening, Leah was in the maintenance bay alone, cleaning weapons after the day's exercise. Her hands moved automatically, smooth and practiced. The air smelled of gun oil and steel. Footsteps echoed behind her. Delaney entered quietly. "You're here late." She didn't look up. "Habit." He leaned against the workbench beside her. "You were in Kandahar." The sound of metal clicked softly as she reassembled the rifle. "Who told you that?" "It's all over the base," he said. "But I looked. Your record doesn't say anything, at least not anything I can read." She stayed silent. He waited, but she kept working, her eyes fixed on the weapon in her hands. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "There are things they don't put in records, sir." Delaney crossed his arms. "Like what?" Leah set the rifle down and met his gaze. Like losing half your team in one night. Like dragging your wounded commander out of a burning convoy. Like waking up 3 days later in a field hospital asking why you're the only one who made it back. The words hit him harder than he expected. She continued, quiet but firm. They don't put that in the file. They just mark it classified and move on. Delaney swallowed. Why didn't you tell anyone? She gave a faint, bitter smile. Because it doesn't change anything. They still see what they see, a woman who looks too young to lead, too soft to fight, too quiet to be dangerous. He didn't know what to say. For once, the confident captain had no orders, no correction, no clever remark. Leah picked up the rifle again, locked the magazine in place, and said softly, "Scars aren't there to prove anything, sir. They're just reminders of what's left." She stood, saluted him, and walked out, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. That night, Delaney couldn't sleep. He kept replaying what she'd said, the way her voice didn't shake even once. He thought about the scars he'd seen on her arms and neck, how some looked surgical, others jagged and uneven. He thought about his own scars, small ones from training accidents, a knee injury from deployment, but nothing like hers. He realized that all his years in command had never brought him as close to death as she had been, and she carried it like a secret burden. The next morning, he called his old contact at Central Command. "I need a verification on a soldier's background," he said carefully. "Sergeant Leah Carter, Operation Scorpion Nest." There was a pause on the line, then a low whistle. "You're asking about that, Carter?" Delaney's brow furrowed. "So it's true?" The voice on the other end dropped lower. "Captain, that operation isn't supposed to exist on paper. But between you and me, she saved a dozen operators when their convoy got ambushed. 3 enemy positions taken down by 1 survivor. She was airlifted out, barely breathing." Delaney sat back in his chair, stunned. Why is she even back in a regular unit? "They offered her medical retirement," the voice said. She refused. That evening, Delaney found Leah outside near the perimeter fence. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of rain. She stood with her arms crossed, staring out at the distant lights of the highway beyond the base. He approached slowly. "You should have told me." She didn't turn. "Would it have changed anything?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "It would have changed everything." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were calm, unreadable. "Respect earned out of pity isn't respect at all." Delaney nodded slowly. "Then earn it again," he said. "Not that you need to, but let me see it. Let them see it." Her gaze softened just a little. "Careful what you ask for, sir." He gave a half smile. "I'll take my chances." A week later, Fort Rainier was scheduled for a joint emergency response drill with the National Guard. It was supposed to be routine until a real emergency hit. A training explosion in the munitions yard went wrong. One of the fuel lines caught fire. Within seconds, thick black smoke was billowing across the compound. Sirens wailed. Soldiers shouted, scrambling to contain the flames. Delaney ran toward the chaos, but Leah was already there, directing crews, pulling men back from the danger zone, shouting orders that cut through the noise. When a blast threw a young private off his feet, she sprinted straight through the smoke to drag him out, her sleeve catching fire. She didn't stop. Delaney watched, frozen for half a heartbeat. That was when he saw it, the way she moved, precise, fearless, automatic. She wasn't reacting to panic, she was reliving it, the past, the war. And for the first time, he understood what the scars really meant. By the time the flames were contained, Leah's hands were burned, her uniform scorched. She waved off the medics and walked straight to Delaney. "All accounted for," she said, coughing through the smoke. Delaney's voice was rough. "You could have been killed." Leah looked at him steadily. "I already was once." That night, as the base settled back into uneasy silence, Delaney stood outside her quarters. The light was off, but through the window he could see her silhouette, still calm like a shadow that had finally stopped running. He whispered to himself, They doubted your age, Carter. They should have doubted their own courage. And for the first time since she arrived, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, real earned respect. The smoke had cleared from Fort Rainer, but the memory of that night lingered like a bruise. The explosion had rattled every corner of the base. Reports were filed, safety officers called, and official statements rehearsed. Yet behind the paperwork, one truth spread faster than any memo. Sergeant Leah Carter had saved lives. For days, soldiers who once whispered behind her back now fell silent when she passed. The same men who'd mocked her age now stood straighter in her presence. But Leah didn't bask in it. She didn't want their praise, and she wanted purpose. Captain Marcus Delaney saw it too. He'd been replaying the fire in his mind every night. He'd seen plenty of bravery in his career, but what she'd done wasn't just brave. It was instinct, the kind that came from scars you don't talk about. Still, he could sense something deeper under her composure, a tension, a restlessness that hadn't eased even after the danger was over, and that unease was about to be tested again. A week later, the base received an urgent call. A nearby town had been hit by a gas main explosion. Civilians were trapped in a collapsed building. The Army was ordered to assist with search and rescue. Delaney assembled a response team within minutes. Leah was among the first to volunteer. As they loaded up the trucks, Delaney glanced at her. "You sure you're fit for this, Sergeant? Your hands are still healing." She pulled on her gloves and said quietly, "They're steady enough to save someone." He didn't argue. The convoy rumbled through the rain-soaked highway, sirens slicing the silence. When they reached the small town, smoke still rose from the ruins of what had once been a 3-story community center. The smell of gas and ash filled the air. Firefighters were already on scene, shouting orders through their masks. A local officer ran up to Delaney. "We've got at least 5 people trapped in the basement. Structure's unstable. We can't reach them from the main entrance." Delaney turned to Leah. "You're our eyes. What do you see?" She crouched, scanning the site. Her gaze moved fast, calculating distances, pressure points, risks. The east wall's weaker, but it's still standing. If we go in low and cut through the support beam, we can crawl through to the basement stairwell. The officer shook his head. "That's suicide." Leah looked at Delaney. "We don't have time for safe options." He hesitated and then nodded. "You lead the team." Inside the wreckage, it was pitch black except for the flicker of flashlights cutting through dust. Every step echoed with the groan of shifting metal. The air was thick with smoke, but Leah moved with eerie confidence, crawling through narrow spaces, testing each beam before trusting it. Behind her, a young corporal coughed. "How do you even know where to go?" Leah didn't look back. "You listen to the silence," she said. "It tells you where the air's still moving." They followed her down a jagged corridor. Somewhere below, faint cries echoed. "Voices," one of the soldiers shouted. "Keep quiet," Leah ordered softly. "Sound bounces. We need direction." She paused, closed her eyes, and listened, the way she once had in desert ruins half a world away. Then she pointed. "There, under the stairwell." The team worked fast, clearing debris by hand. Leah's gloves tore, reopening the burns on her palms, but she didn't stop. When they finally pulled a trapped woman free, Leah carried her on her back through the same collapsing passage they'd entered. By the time they reached daylight, the crowd outside erupted in relief. Paramedics rushed forward, firefighters cheered. Leah barely heard them. She turned back to go in again. "Carter," Delaney grabbed her arm. "You've already done enough." She shook him off. "There are more." Her voice left no room for debate. For the next hour, she worked inside the ruins like a ghost, in and out, hauling beams, guiding stretchers, calling out names. By the time the last survivor was rescued, Leah was covered in ash and blood that wasn't hers. When she finally stepped out for the last time, the structure behind her gave one final groan and collapsed. She didn't flinch. The firefighter stared at her as if she'd just walked out of a war zone. And in a way she had. Later, back at the base, Delaney found her sitting alone behind the motor pool, staring at the sunset. Her hands were bandaged again, her uniform streaked with soot. "You ever stop moving?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Not if I can help it." He sat beside her on the curb, elbows on his knees. "You don't talk much about what happened." "Before?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the orange light fade into gray. "There's not much to say. You lost people, he said carefully. She nodded once. 6 good ones. We were a recon team in Kandahar. A routine patrol. Or that's what they told us. She drew a breath, steady but heavy. We walked into an ambush. I was the youngest. I watched them fall one by one. I don't even remember getting hit. Just the heat, the noise, then nothing. Delaney listened, silent. When I woke up, I was in Germany. They told me I was lucky. But luck doesn't feel like this. She turned her hands, palms up. It doesn't feel like remembering every scream. The wind rustled through the trees. Delaney said quietly, "You don't have to carry it alone, you know." She gave him a tired smile. "You're kind, sir. But that's not how soldiers like me work. We carry what's left, so someone else doesn't have to." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think that's what your scars mean?" She met his eyes. "No. They mean I survived when better people didn't." A few days later, Fort Rainer held a commendation ceremony for the rescue operation. Reporters were there, local officials, even a few generals. Delaney stood beside Leah as the base commander read the citations. When they called her name, she stepped forward, modest as always. The crowd applauded, but she looked almost uncomfortable under the attention. The general smiled. "Sergeant Carter, your bravery saved 7 civilians and 2 soldiers. You've reminded us what service truly looks like." As he pinned the medal to her chest, the general paused. "And if I may ask, Sergeant, how long have you been serving?" She hesitated. 14 years, sir." A murmur ran through the crowd. She looked too young for that to be possible. Delaney saw the confusion and smiled faintly. "Her record doesn't show the half of it," he said quietly to the general. Leah simply saluted. "Just doing my duty, sir." But as the applause swelled, she felt a familiar ache under the bandages on her palms. The same ache that reminded her every victory came with a price. That night, long after the crowd had gone, Leah stood alone in the empty parade ground. The moonlight caught the edges of her medal, glinting softly against the dark. Delaney approached quietly. "You did good, Carter," she nodded. "We all did." He hesitated. "You know, when you first got here, I thought you were just another transfer who'd had it easy." She smiled. "I thought you were another commander who talked too much." He chuckled softly. "Fair." Then more seriously, "I misjudged you, badly." Leah turned toward him, her expression calm but kind. "You weren't the first." She started to walk away, then stopped. "But you're one of the few who apologized." Delaney watched her go, the sound of her boots fading into the night. He knew the story of her scars wasn't over yet. And deep down, he sensed something else. Something brewing that would test her again. Because peace never lasted long for people like Leah Carter. The leaves had started to turn at Fort Rainer. Golden light fell across the training yard, softening the lines of the barracks and the hum of morning drills. For a while, life on base almost felt normal again. Almost. Sergeant Leah Carter went through her routines quietly. She ran before dawn, taught her squad during the day, and kept to herself after dark. The others had stopped whispering about her long ago. Now when she passed, they nodded with respect. But respect wasn't what kept her going. Purpose did. And lately, purpose had been harder to find. The commendation ceremony had brought attention she didn't want. Her story, or at least the version the Army allowed to be told, had made its way into a local newspaper. Hometown hero saves 9 in explosion rescue. Reporters had even asked for interviews. She declined them all, but someone else had noticed. Someone Leah thought she'd never hear from again. It started with a letter, plain envelope, no return address, left on her bunk one evening after drills. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. "They told us you were dead. If you're alive, you need to know the truth about Kandahar." Leah froze. Her heart beat once. Hard. At the bottom, a name was scrawled in ink. Sergeant Miguel Ortiz. She hadn't heard that name in years. Ortiz had been one of hers, part of the recon unit during Operation Scorpion Nest. She remembered seeing his vehicle go up in flames. There had been no recovery. They said no one survived, until now. The next morning, Leah went straight to Captain Delaney's office. He looked up from his desk as she entered, a mix of surprise and concern in his eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "I might have. she replied, handing him the letter. He read it, frowning. This could be a prank. Leah shook her head. That handwriting's real. Ortiz always signed his name like that, the O-loops twice. Delaney looked at her. If he's alive, why send this to you? Because he knows what happened out there wasn't what they told the world. Delaney leaned back slowly. You think the operation was covered up? I don't think, Leah said quietly. I know. She told him what she'd never told anyone, not even the army therapists. The mission in Kandahar wasn't supposed to be recon. Their team had been sent to intercept a weapons convoy crossing from the mountains. Intel said it was routine. But when they arrived, they found something else. A CIA black site transfer. Civilians mixed with insurgents, everything off book. Before Leah could radio it in, explosions tore through the convoy. The airstrike came from their own coordinates. Friendly fire. They'd been erased, all to cover an operation that was never meant to exist. Leah survived because she'd been thrown clear by the blast. She'd woken up in a field hospital under guard. They told her she'd been wounded in an enemy ambush. They sent her home, rewrote her record and told her to forget, but she hadn't. She couldn't. Now, if Ortiz was alive, he might still have the proof. Delaney listened in silence, his hands clenched on the desk. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. You know, if this is true, going after it could end your career. Leah looked at him steadily. Sir, my career ended in Kandahar. This is about something else now. He nodded, understanding. Then we find him. 2 nights later, under cover of a weekend pass, Leah drove out with Delaney toward the outskirts of Richmond. The letter's postmark had traced back to a small town nearby. They followed the address typed faintly on the back of the envelope, a rundown storage facility behind an abandoned gas station. Rain began to fall again, hard and cold. When they entered, the smell of rust and dust filled the air. A single bulb flickered near the back, and there he was, Miguel Ortiz, older, thinner, face lined with scars that matched hers. When he saw Leah, his eyes widened with disbelief. You're really here. She stepped forward, voice trembling for the first time in years. They said you were gone. So did they about you, he said. Then he looked at Delaney cautiously. Who's the suit? Someone I trust, Leah replied. Ortiz reached into a crate and pulled out a worn metal drive. I kept this. Drone footage, comm logs, reports. It proves what they did. The strike wasn't a mistake, Leah. They called it in. From command. Delaney's jaw tightened. Jesus. Before Leah could speak, headlights flared outside the warehouse. 2 black SUVs pulling up fast. Ortiz swore under his breath. They found me. Move, Leah shouted. Bullets shattered the front windows as they dove behind cover. The air filled with dust and glass. Leah's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her sidearm, motioned to Delaney to flank right. Ortiz, the drive, she shouted. He tossed it to her just as another shot cracked through the doorframe. Leah fired twice, precise, controlled. One of the attackers dropped. Delaney covered the exit, returning fire as they pushed toward the back door. They burst out into the rain, sprinting toward the truck. Tires screeched on wet gravel as Leah gunned the engine. No one spoke for miles. The only sound was the rain and Leah's heavy breathing. They drove until dawn, stopping at a rest area off an empty highway. Ortiz handed Leah a flash drive, a backup copy. You're the only one who can use this, he said. They'll come after me if I try. Leah stared at it for a long moment. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal casing. I don't want revenge, she said softly. I just want the truth. Delaney met her eyes. Then we give them the truth. Back at Fort Rainer, Delaney used his clearance to send the data directly to an internal inspector general. Encrypted, off-network, untraceable. A week later, an investigation was quietly opened. Names were redacted, files seized, and for the first time in years, Operation Scorpion Nest was officially acknowledged. No press releases, no public ceremony, but Leah didn't need that. When the classified memo came down the line, she saw only one sentence that mattered. Sergeant Leah Carter and surviving personnel are hereby recognized for actions above and beyond the call of duty during classified operations in Kandahar province. It wasn't glory, but it was truth, and truth finally was enough. On her last evening at Fort Rainer, Leah stood by the fence again, watching the sunset burn orange over the hills. Her uniform was packed, her orders approved. She'd asked for reassignment, not to combat, but to teach field medics. Delaney joined her quietly. "You're leaving, huh?" She smiled faintly. "Time to let the next fight belong to someone else." He nodded. "You ever think about writing it all down?" She shook her head. "No, some stories aren't for papers. They're for people who were there." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "When I first met you, I thought you were too young to have seen war. Turns out you were too brave to let it define you." Leah turned toward him, the last light glinting off the faint scars on her neck. "Age doesn't tell the story, Captain." "The scars do." She gave him one last salute, firm and steady. "Thank you for believing me." Delaney returned it, his throat tight. "Thank you for teaching me what belief looks like." She smiled, turned and walked away into the fading light. No medals, no music, just quiet strength and the soft whisper of boots on gravel. And behind her, the wind carried the truth she'd fought so long to reveal. Not the story of her scars, but the story of how she refused to let them define her.